As many of you might already know, there is currently a moratorium on executions in the state of California. The last execution in California happened on January 17, 2006, when inmate Clarence Ray Allen was executed after spending 23 years on death row. By the way, I did do a story on him if you're interested. The governor in California at the time of Clarence's death was Arnold Schwarzenegger. Governor Schwarzenegger comes from Austria, a country that does not believe in the death penalty. Having spent many years in the United States of America, Schwarzenegger believed that clemency should not be used to undo the considered judgment of the people in favor of the death penalty, but to prevent the miscarriage of justice. He was very opinionated in popular executions, like the execution of Stanley Tookie Williams. He did not understand how Stanley continued to express his innocence despite strong evidence against him. It was hard for Schwarzenegger to believe in the sincerity of death row inmates' claims of redemption. Schwarzenegger was governor from 2003 to 2011, and the governor after him was Edmund G. Jerry Brown. Governor Jerry Brown had actually served as a governor once before, from the years 1975 to 1983. During his first time in office, he was very vocal in opposing the death penalty, and he vetoed the death penalty, but the legislature overrode it in 1977. He was so against executions that he would be outside of prisons when executions were being held, protesting against them. During his first time in office, though, he was unable to stop executions from happening. Governor Jerry Brown became governor again from 2011 to 2019. Having always been vocal about being against executions, he was content that there were no executions during his second time in office. The current governor of California is Governor Gavin Newsom, and he took office in 2019. He took office in January, and by March 2019, he had signed an executive order placing a moratorium on the death penalty in the state of California. In his executive order, he also called for the withdrawal of the lethal injection protocols and to close the execution chamber at San Quentin Prison. Mind you, when Governor Schwarzenegger was in office, 2008 to be exact, over $800,000 was spent on the reconstruction of the execution chamber at San Quentin Prison. Now, the execution chamber is closed down and all of the money spent was for nothing. Governor Newsom believes that the death penalty is inconsistent with the state's values, and he has no plans to reopen the chamber. With that being said, even though there is a moratorium on executions, inmates are still being sentenced to death year after year in the state of California, and inmates who have already been sentenced to death are still on death row. These inmates will most likely not be executed until a new governor who believes in executions reinstates it. In 2023, there were 4 people in the state of California to be sentenced to death. 2 convictions in San Bernardino County, 1 in Riverside County, and 1 in Sacramento County. 3 inmates are Hispanic and 1 is Black. The first inmate who was sentenced to death in California in 2023 was Samuel Amador, and his sentence was handed out on February 15, 2023. Samuel was originally arrested back in 2013 and put in prison for murder, parole violation, and other misdemeanor charges. He murdered a 26-year-old in Highland and lived a life of crime. That did not stop while he was serving his prison time either. On Wednesday, August 1, 2018, a male inmate was found unresponsive in his cell. He was transferred from San Bernardino prison to a local hospital, but he ended up dying an hour after arriving. On February 15, 2023, Samuel was given 3 death sentences. 1 death sentence was for the male inmate he killed back on August 1, 2018, and the other death sentences were for murders he committed back in 2004 and 2007. Samuel was transferred to San Quentin, California's death row on February 23, 2023. The second person sentenced to death in California in 2023 was Desmond Stevenson out of San Bernardino County. Back in 2016, a then 25-year-old Desmond decided to rob a convenience store with his 23-year-old friend Robert Green. It was a Friday night when 31-year-old Mitesh Patel was working at the Bossy Drive-In Dairy in San Bernardino. Mitesh's wife was in the back when she heard commotion. The 2 men demanded money, and being that the men were equipped with shotguns, Mitesh followed all commands and gave the men money. After getting the money they came in for, the men shot and killed Mitesh. After leaving the drive-in dairy, Desmond and Robert drove their getaway car to a liquor store with the intentions of robbing them as well. Once they made it inside, they saw that the cashier was protected by bulletproof glass, so they left. Police were given a description of their getaway car, and a detective remembered the car from a previous case. Robert was found and arrested first, and Desmond was arrested at his apartment, and it was there that detectives found the weapons and clothing used during the murder of Mitesh. Being that it was a murder in the course of a robbery, Desmond was eligible to be sentenced to death, and he was sentenced to death on April 14, 2023. He was transferred to death row at San Quentin on April 25th. The third person sentenced to death in 2023 was Salvador Vasquez Oliva out of Sacramento County. Salvador lived with his family in Southland Park. Back in March of 2017, Salvador went on a rampage and killed his wife, Angelique, their 2 children, Mia and Alvin, and his niece, Ashley Coleman. A family member called the police station and requested a welfare check of the home. Police arrived at the residence and found the 4 deceased victims. Police were informed that Salvador lived in the home as well, and they were able to locate him within hours. Salvador's trial began in 2023, and on May 1st, Judge Michael Sweet sentenced Salvador to death after a jury found him guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder. His official death sentence was handed out on May 12th, 2023. The last person who was sentenced to death in 2023 was Juan Francisco Inunza out of Riverside County. He was sentenced on July 28th. Back in 2014, Juan was renting a room out in a trailer from his childhood friend, Edward Pierce. Juan had been renting the room for about 2 months. One day, on June 3, 2014, between 8 and 9 a.m., Edward knocked on the door because it was locked. Juan shouted out, "Who is it?" After finding out it was Edward, he told him he could come inside. When Edward walked in, he saw their mutual friend and their roommate on the floor face down. This roommate also happened to be a female. Edward wasn't sure what was going on and why there was no urgency to get the female help. Juan told Edward that their friend had a stroke. Edward was creeped out and started walking towards the door of the bedroom. That is when Juan attacked Edward from behind, strike after strike. Juan then had a change of heart because he had known Edward since childhood. He stopped attacking Edward and said, "Just get the heck out of here." Edward left and his life was spared. They were living in a trailer park where everyone lived in close proximity to each other. One woman named Christine Nuno was notified that someone needed help at Edward's trailer. She went inside of the trailer and noticed the victim crying and struggling to breathe, so she called 911. She told the 911 operator that there was a thick dark red mark from ear to ear on the victim's neck. She also told the operator that Juan was responsible for the crime. Juan's ex then came around the trailer between 10:30 and 11 a.m., and by that time, the paramedics had still not arrived at the scene. She saw the victim dying, and she also noticed that Christine was in her car on the phone, not helping the victim. Juan's ex, Tina, tried asking the victim questions about what had happened, but her response to every question was Juan. When responding officers finally arrived, the victim was able to tell them that she was assaulted with a cord. She said her roommate Juan was responsible, and after that, the only thing she would repeat was, "Juan did it." The victim was transported to the hospital, but she died sometime later. For this murder, Juan was convicted and sent to prison. He was not sentenced to death, though. It was in 2021 when he ended up killing a fellow inmate. His trial did not begin until 2023, and he was found guilty of committing murder in prison and was sentenced to death on July 28, 2023. He was transferred from Riverside County to San Quentin Prison for death row inmates. After listening to this video, do you think California should stop sentencing people to death? Or do you think it makes sense to keep sentencing criminals to death because one day the death penalty might return in the state? This is not the first time there was a moratorium in the country or in the state, and the death penalty was reinstated. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below.